Yo, what's going on, everybody? It is StraitOuttaBoston here, aka the King of Boston. Today we are back for the second edition of the 2014 MLB Season Preview Podcasts. Today we're covering the NL Central, and as always, I'm joined by Ryan. Ryan, how's it going?
What's going on, guys? We're going to be doing the NL Central today. So I'm going to let you lead off with the Chicago Cubs.
Yep, we'll start from the bottom as always. We're going to get things started with the 66 and 96 Chicago Cubs, last place in the NL Central last year. Let's recap their offseason quickly. They acquired Justin Ruggiano in a trade with the Miami Marlins for Brian Bogasevic. They signed Jose Veras, who was the closer for part of the time last year with the Houston Astros, was traded at the deadline to the Tigers and became a middle reliever for them. He had a 3.02 ERA last year with an 8.6 Ks per nine as opposed to a 3.2 walks per nine. They also signed Jason Hamill to a one-year contract worth $6 million and signed James McDonald, the former Pittsburgh Pirate pitcher. So adding a couple depth options to their starting rotation there.
He got injured a couple days ago.
Oh, well, not good.
Yeah, he's been having some injury problems with his shoulder as of lately. I guess second half of this season that's what he dealt with. So I guess it's coming up again.
That's never a good sign. But anyway, that's really short and short what their offseason was. Not a big offseason as you would expect from a team like that. So Ryan, I'll ask you first things first. What do you think of this team in 2014?
Well, this team obviously is not going to be competing for a division title, but I mean they do have a ton of exciting prospects. I mean Javier Baez, he's been destroying in spring training, and they just have a ton of depth down there. A lot of great prospects. They got him, Chris Bryant, Mike Olt's been hitting really well in spring training too. So I mean they just have like, a lot of young pieces on this team, having like Alfonso Soriano, jeez. And Anthony Rizzo being one of those. Starlin Castro. I haven't really heard much of Castro lately, but yeah, I mean, like they just have a ton of prospects on that team. That's really all they're looking forward to is the future right now. To be honest, I mean, they really don't have anything to play for this season. So.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It's no doubt going to be another rebuilding year for this team, but I do like where this team is headed. I think they're headed in the right direction with probably one of the better farm systems in baseball. I think they got the right guys in the front office with Theo Epstein and Jed Hoyer, two guys that I would know firsthand from with experience. They worked in Boston for 8 or 9 years, something like that, almost 10 years. And one thing I know about Theo Epstein is he doesn't always hit on his free agent moves, as we've probably seen with signing guys like Edwin Jackson to $52 million contracts or giving guys like Carl Crawford $142 million contracts. But he is really, really good, and it's a specialty, is evaluating with young talent. And you can tell just with the work he's done in these last 2 years with the Cubs, completely revamping that farm system. It's filled with young talent. You mentioned Javi Baez, who is just hitting everything, it seems, in spring training.
Yeah.
They're filled with other prospects around, like Junior Lake, who came up at the end last year, hit 284 in 236 at-bats the second half of the season. He looked really good. Starlin Castro definitely took steps back last year, but he's only 23 years old. They locked him up to a long-term extension, so clearly they have hope for him to bounce back and regain some of that form he had in previous seasons. Anthony Rizzo's a guy that one of the first moves Theo Epstein did was trade for him. He's a guy that was drafted by Theo back in Boston. Rizzo was traded to the Padres in the Adrian Gonzalez trade, and then the Cubs traded Andrew Cashner for him before the 2013 season, but before the 2012 season, I think. Actually, I don't know. I can't remember.
I think it was 2012.
Yeah, I think so. You're right. Yeah, it was definitely 2012. It was one of the first moves Epstein did while he was in Chicago. And although, Rizzo, he's only 23 years old, he hasn't quite been what everyone wanted him to be. Only 233 last year, but he still had a 742 OPS. He still had 23 home runs, and I think that there's still hope for a guy like that. Like I said, it's just a team filled with young talent. I really think that this team has a bright future if they keep moving in the right direction. Obviously, like we both said, it's not going to be a team that's going to do anything this year. But I would definitely have high hopes for this team moving forward.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like, if people are really worried about Rizzo hitting 233 or whatever, some of these young guys struggling, I mean, you just kind of just be patient with it. I mean, you got a ton of years to just kind of develop. You don't want to screw it up, so just give them time, and I think this team's gonna be really good down the road.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's not really much else to say. They didn't make any splashes in the off season, and it's a lot of the same group that's coming back from last year. They did lose Deandre Navarro to free agency. He signed with the Toronto Raptors. I almost said the Toronto Raptors, the Toronto Blue Jays. They ended up losing David DeJesus at the midseason last year. They also traded Alfonso Soriano and dumped a lot of his contract onto the New York Yankees. They still have Nate Scherholtz. He's a piece that they could look to trade at some point during the season. I'm not sure what his contract situation is, but he had 21 home runs last year. Ended up hitting 250. He had like a 770 OPS, so he could be valuable to teams, especially at the midway point of the season. So I think this is a team with some moves to make potentially. And who knows, maybe Edwin Jackson comes on this year and regains some of that form he had from a couple years ago and becomes some sort of trade asset. But other than that, do you have anything else to say? Do you want to move on to the offseason grade?
Yeah, let's go on to the offseason grades.
All right, so I'll go first. I gave them a B minus. It's one of those situations where they didn't do much. They didn't have a lot of opportunity to do much, and I think it was kind of the right move to not do much. I think it would have been a waste to go out and sign a guy like Shin-Soo Choo to 7 years and $140 million or something like that. I think you got to wait for those pieces to fall in place years down the road when the team is building up towards contention again. They made a couple small moves. They got Jose Veras, like I said, Jason Hamill and James McDonald. Those are two guys that have succeeded in the past, and maybe they can succeed again in the right system, or not in the right system, but in the right, I guess just in the right place, so to say. Sometimes a change of scenery can be the best thing for a guy like that. So I liked what they did in a small sense. I wouldn't say it was an overwhelmingly positive offseason, but I think considering the circumstances, for the most part, it was decent. Brian, what do you think?
I'm just giving them a C. I mean, kind of like what you said, there really wasn't much expected out of them. They're not going to go out and sign Shin-Soo Choo or whoever, but I mean, they did what they had to. They got Jason Hamill, they got Jose Veras. So I mean, it's just a solid off season, whatever. I mean, this team really doesn't need much. They're just waiting for the future, pretty much.
Yep. Can't really not much else to say about that. The over under on this team this year is 70.5. This is another classic case of it's a young team. You don't know. There's a big range of where they could fall. 70.5, right around that 70 win margin. I'm gonna end up going under on this team. Just because the only hope for going under, they went 66 and 96 last year. The only hope for this team going over that is if some of those young players step up, if guys like Javi Baez come up and produce immediately, if guys like Starlin Castro bounce back. But just considering the guys that they lost, like Deandre Navarro, if Scherholtz gets traded midway through the season, they're not going to have Soriano, who they had for half the season last year. I think there's just not enough talent on this team for me to see them getting more than 70 wins, so I'm going to go under on this one.
Yeah, I'm taking the under on this one as well. I mean, 66 and 96 last year, and they really didn't bring in anything that would really boost that win average. And like you said, they had Alfonso Soriano for half the season, so that's probably going to boost their win percentage last year a little bit. So I think taking the under on this one's pretty easy.
All right. So that's pretty much that for the Cubs. Unless you have any final thoughts, do you want to move on to the Milwaukee Brewers?
Yeah, let's go ahead on to the Milwaukee Brewers, who were 74 and 88 last year, fourth in the NL Central. They traded away. How do you say this guy's name? I can never get it right.
Norichi Aoki, I believe.
Norichi Aoki.
I think you spelled it
they
wrong.
traded him. They
try that.
Nori. All right, but they traded him to the Royals for left-handed pitcher Will Smith, who apparently had a really good second half last year for the Royals in their bullpen. They lost Corey Hart to the Mariners, and he was injured for the entire season last year, right? I mean,
oh yeah, he was out. I think he tore his ACL, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. They also signed Mark Reynolds, who was washed up for 1 year, $2 million. Signed Francisco Rodriguez for 1 year, $2.25 million. And surprisingly, they came out and signed Matt Garza only probably like a month ago for 4 years, $50 million with a $13 million fifth-year option. So, I mean, Milwaukee Brewers this offseason, they really didn't do much. Pretty much like this whole NL Central did. Everyone just kind of stayed there. I mean, no one was really making moves, and this team really wasn't expected to make a ton of moves either. Obviously, this year they do get Ryan Braun back from suspension. So, Ian, what do you think about Ryan Braun coming back this year?
Well, obviously not a fan of steroids or stuff like that being in the game. But I am of the belief that a lot more of it goes on than the public might perceive. And, he was the guy that, my favorite team being the Red Sox, if they went out and traded for him and got him on the cheap, that'd be fantastic. All I care about is if he can produce. If he's on my favorite team, all I care about is if he can produce. And the guy has proved in the past that he can be one of the 5 best hitters in baseball. So I think if you're a Brewers fan, although obviously there's some relationship issues with there, he's kind of betrayed the fan base a little bit. But I mean, I think if he can move on, then I think everyone can. And like I said, he's a great player. He has potential to be a great player again. Struggled a little bit last year with his power numbers, but I think those can bounce back. As for the rest of the team, I'm really confused by how this team did their offseason. It seems like a team that's just destined to be muddled in the middle. Um, I mean, you lose Corey Hart, who's a pretty productive. I mean, he was a productive player pre-injury. I would imagine he's going to be a reasonably productive player post-injury. And they trade away Norichi Aoki, a good contact hitter, a good stolen base guy, for a left-handed, probably a reliever, and Will Smith, who you were right, he did have post-All-Star break, or it's in the second half of the season. He ended up with like a 2.6 ERA, I believe, as opposed to like a 3.7 in the first half. But it was just like a curious trade. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't hang on to a guy like that. But then they go out and they sign Matt Garza to a 4-year, $50 million contract. It just kind of seems confusing. It seems like, one day they're losing a good but not great player. The next day they're signing one, probably overpaying for one. I mean, everyone gets overpaid in the open market though, so that's all relative. But it was just a confusing offseason for a team that they're going to be right around the 74 win total again. They're not going to get a whole lot better. Their farm system is, probably one of the bottom 15 farm systems in baseball. They got pretty lucky getting Gene Segura in the Zach Greinke trade, but other than that, they don't have a ton of young bright spots on the team. They do have Chris Davis, a player who's likely going to win the left field job for the team. He's only 25 years old. He had a good second half last year. He could come up and do some things for the team, be one of the young bright spots. They do have some young talent with him, Segura. I think Willie Peralta is still. I haven't heard too much about him, but I know he was considered one of their top prospects before. And they still have some hope with this pitching staff. They have guys like Matt Garza, Giovanni Gallardo, who have produced in the past and can possibly produce again in 2013. But there's not enough talent on this team to make me think they can win more than 80 games if everything kind of falls in place. I really don't see with this team. It's going to be another year in the middle for them. What do you think?
I mean, I think that their rotation is I don't know. I mean, their rotation is kind of like weird because I mean, you got Giovanni Gallardo, and then you got Kyle Loesch, who I mean, he actually had a really really nice season last year. But they had those two guys, and then you add in Matt Garza, and that's actually a pretty solid top three of the rotation. So, I mean, I doubt that those guys are going to be able to carry this team. Like you said, there is enough talent on this team. So, I don't know. I mean, this is like a really interesting team. I mean, really interesting offseason, made little to no sense, but I don't know. This team's probably not going to win over 80 games this year either. So.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Just to it's just a team with talent, but not a ton of talent. I like guys like Carlos Gomez and Gene Segura. Like I mentioned, Jonathan Lucroy hit 280 last year. He was almost had an 800 OPS. But it's just a weird roster. It's not constructed with any certain strengths. They're not like an overly offensive team. They're not geared towards contact or power necessarily, especially now that they've lost Aoki. If Ramos Ramirez can stay healthy, maybe he turns into a trade chip at the deadline.
Carlos Gomez.
Yeah.
Him too.
Yeah, I almost forgot about him. He ended up like the third or fourth highest WAR in the NL, I believe, last year. But it's just a team locked in the middle, and I don't see them getting out of that anytime soon. They don't have a ton of direction with their farm system. It's not a strong farm system by any sense or by any stretch of the imagination. And it's not a team with, kind of an attractive feature to it, like in LA that can attract big name free agents. It doesn't have a big ownership group that's going to spend, $250 million on a payroll. It's a team that I don't know where they're going to go moving forward, and I would have serious questions if I was a Brewers fan. But do you have any other final thoughts? Do you want to move on to the offseason grade?
Yeah, we'll go to the offseason grades now.
Okay, you can go ahead and start this time.
All right. My offseason grade for the Brewers, I gave them a B-. I think Matt Garza, getting him kind of like evens it out, but without him, this really wasn't that much of a spectacular offseason. So, what about you?
I'm gonna give them a C-, just because I don't hate the Garza signing. I mean, that's an AAV of 12.3 or something like that. That's not terrible for a guy like Matt Garza. And that's certainly a tradable contract at any one of the next 4 trade deadlines, which is always a good time to trade a guy like Garza, as we've seen over the past couple of years. But it's just an offseason that does not make sense to me, and I don't get where there's any sense of direction. I have no idea what they're doing here because it's like they trade away good players, but they bring in good players in the same sense. I don't know why they would trade away Aoki. I don't know why they wouldn't make an effort to re-sign Corey Hart. I don't know. I feel like I'm being a little bit harsh on them, and I don't want to be attacked by Brewers fans, but it's an off season that didn't make sense to me, and it's an off season that didn't provide them with any direction moving forward, which is what you want with a team like this. But without further ado, let's go on to the over-unders. The over-under for this team is 79.5. So to put that in perspective, they won 74 games last year. They would have to increase their win total by 5.5 games. I definitely did not see it with this team. Not enough young talent to make me think that guys are going to step up this year and come back. Hopefully they'll get a full season of Ryan Braun, and if they get a full season of Ramos Ramirez as well, that could be a big boost. But other than that, Jonathan Lucroy caught 147 games or something like that last year. That's not sustainable. Segura played 145 games. Gomez played 147. Aoki played 100. Well, I guess Aoki's not on the team anymore, but injuries are always bound to happen, so I think some of that will cancel out. And other than that, I just don't see enough talent added to this team outside of maybe a guy like Chris Davis, or maybe a guy like Scooter Gennett, who came up and hit 324 last year in 69 games. Maybe those guys can come up and provide something, but it's not enough young talent on this team, and it's not enough new talent on this team to make me think they're going to be 5.5 wins better than they were last year. So I'm a very strong under with this team.
Yeah, I'm definitely way under this team too. I think that 74 and 88, and if Ryan Braun does come back this year and he actually does hit pretty well, and you have the addition of Matt Garza, that could definitely boost your win total by maybe 6 to 8 games. But I don't know. I guess it could get close right there with I just bit my tongue.
So sorry.
I can't believe this happened. Oh my god, I'm so off track now. But yeah, I think getting Ryan Braun and Matt Garza back, it could definitely get to maybe 79.5, but I don't know. I don't think it'll happen at
all. So that's pretty much that. We'll move on to our third team. I'll do the talking on this one while your tongue recovers.
Yeah.
So the third team that finished third in the NL Central last year with a 90-72 record is the Cincinnati Reds. This is a team that had yet another playoff failure last year and had a pretty big overhaul with part of their roster. The biggest thing was firing Dusty Baker and promoting Brian Price to manager. Baker's the guy that has made something around 11 postseason appearances and has 3 postseason series wins. I was in favor of that move. I think when you have a team that just can't get over that type of hump year after year, it's usually something to do with the manager or some type of influence like that. So I think moving on from Baker was the right idea. But they also had a big overhaul on parts of their roster. They lost Bronson Arroyo to free agency. He signed with the Diamondbacks. We covered that in the last podcast. They also ended up sending Ryan Hanigan away in a 3-team trade. He went to the Tampa Bay Rays. They acquired David Holmberg, a pitching prospect, in return. And sorry, I just got lost in my train of thought. They signed Skip Schumacher to a small contract. He'll be helpful for their bench, a good depth option. They ended up signing Brian Pena to be their backup catcher. Him, along with Devin Mesoraco, I believe, are going to take the reins of that catcher this year, and replacing Ryan Hanigan. They lost Shin-Soo Choo. That was a big, big loss. He was one of the better players on their team last year. He had upwards of a 450 OBP. And a big contract demanded to him from the Texas Rangers. So that's going to be a big loss for them. He will likely be replaced by Billy Hamilton, who will probably be the full-time center fielder this year. He's a top prospect, formerly a shortstop prospect, and moved him to center field after Todd Frazier's breakout year in 2012. And they also gave Homer Bailey a big 6-year, $105 million extension. Definitely a big move for a guy like that who has had good seasons in the past. He's also had bad seasons in the past. You can, I guess, have your issues with that contract if you want, but overall, I mean, it's not a terrible contract, I would say. It's a pretty good pitcher at a young age, is probably going to get better in the future. The biggest thing with this team, and I think you wrote it down, and I got to agree with it, is injuries. It's a pitching staff, Matt Latos, Johnny Cueto, Homer Bailey, Mike Leake, and Tony Cingrani, which has suffered from injuries in the past. Cueto has been hurt the last couple of years. Latos has suffered from injuries in the past.
I think Latos is actually injured right now, too.
Yeah, so and I don't know what their pitching depth is like. I don't know how good their farm system is as to their pitchers, but I think it's a team that can't afford a major injury to a long-term guy like that, or a long-term injury to a guy like that, I should say. I am a big fan of Tony Cingrani. He came on last year, went pretty under the radar. but had a
Yeah.
good year last year. You can't say anything bad about that guy, at least not yet. Um, but other than that, it's a thin team, not a lot of depth. I didn't mind getting rid of Ryan Hannigan, even though I like Ryan Hannigan as a player. I think it's fine if you want to move on with Devin Mesoraco as your catcher for the future. But other than that, it's a team that, and I think you're gonna agree with this, and I'll let you go off on this point. It could be a big step back for this team in 2014. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of people are pegging this team as being a team that's going to really regress this year, and I'm really kind of feeling that too with this team. I mean, losing Bronson Royal, he's the definition of consistency, and this rotation can really absorb that. But I mean, if any one of those guys goes down, if Cueto gets injured, I mean, this rotation is going to get really thin really quick. So this team is really going to have to rely on some big seasons from the middle of the order. Brandon Phillips, Joey Votto, Jay Bruce, who just hits a ton of home runs a year. But all these guys really need to be produced from now and there. Those guys are really going to carry this team. Also, Billy Hamilton. I mean, he's going to be really interesting to see this year. Seeing how he can do in his first full-time major league season. Obviously, losing Shin-Soo Choo is going to be a major blow to this team as well. I think the bullpen's pretty good, though, with obviously Aroldis Chapman, but the rest of those guys are really solid. Jonathan Broxton, Sam LeCure, a couple big names, Sean Marshall. So I think this team has a chance to definitely maybe surprise some people this year, but I also think there's a very, very big chance that they can take a big step backwards as well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the team as opposed to last year. Their only big addition, you could say, is Ryan Ludwig. Only got 38 games in last year. I believe he separated the shoulder on opening day, dislocated it, and that bothered him throughout most of the year. I think maybe getting him back to full strength would help. Hamilton is a guy that I don't know if his MLB, hitting abilities, for lack of a better term, are kind of where they need to be for him to be a productive full-time center fielder. Obviously, when he gets on base, he's going to fly, he's going to steal bases, he's going to be a nuisance on the base paths, but he's got to get there first. He's got to get on base first to kind of use that capability. And other than that, there's not a lot of big additions to this team that make me think that it's going to be a whole lot better than it was last year, unless you think that the gap between Bronson Arroyo and Tony Cingrani is going to be big enough to make a significant improvement in that pitching staff. But I definitely agree with you. It's a team that could take steps back this year, but I think we'll get into that when we get to our over-unders. But do you want to move on to the offseason grades?
Yeah, we'll go to the offseason grades, and I'll go first in this one. I gave them a C minus. I really thought that losing Bronson Arroyo is really going to be a major thing to this team. Also losing Shin-Soo Choo, they really weren't expecting to re-sign him this year, but I mean, just losing him regardless is really kind of bad. I think the Homer Bailey extension, we didn't really talk about that, but what do you think about giving Homer Bailey, who's going to be their number 3 starter this year, 6 years, $105 million?
Well, Homer Bailey's a guy that, as I mentioned, has succeeded in recent years, but he's also 27 years old, and he came up and he had an ERA of over 4 for parts of his first 6 seasons or 5 seasons, I believe. And then in the last 2 years, he's had ERAs of 3.64 and 3.49. He's pitched over 200 innings. He's given them sub 1.25 whips. He's definitely come on in the last couple of years, but and maybe it's because I haven't watched a whole lot of Cincinnati Reds baseball, but it's a guy that I think I would wait a little bit on. I would look for maybe another year and a half or so, or just look for some more signs of consistency before committing $105 million to a middle of the rotation type of pitcher. I mean, if he is what he is right now, he's a number 3 starter, and his AAV is, I mean, that's almost $17 million per year. That's too much for me to pay a number 3 starter. If this is what he's going to be for the rest of his career. Now, he's 27, he's going to be 28 this year. Maybe he can show signs of improvement. But I am a little bit skeptical of the amount of that contract. But I'll talk about my offseason grade. And I think what you touched on with the Shin-Soo Choo thing, it's not necessarily not getting him back, but it's so your option moving forward is going to be Billy Hamilton. But I think you need an insurance option for a guy like that who has proven nothing in the majors so far. He's likely going to be a 250 hitter or something like that, unless he can be one of these guys who gets good at getting slap infield singles, or is a good bunter or something like that, and can use his speed in that sense. But I think the lack of an insurance option on this team for a guy like that, unless you want to play Chris Heisey in center field or something like that, I don't think I'd be a fan of that. It's not a deep team. They're an injury or two away from really suffering, especially if Votto misses an extended period of time, or if Johnny Cueto or Matt Latos miss extended periods of time. It's a team that definitely has big drop-off capability, and I think it's a depth thing for this team. which is why I did not like their offseason. So I don't know if I mentioned already, but I gave them a D plus. Just didn't make any effort to get better, and that's fine if they want to have this transition type year. If they think they have a couple studs in their farm system that are going to come up in the next couple of years, maybe produce at that time, and they don't want to make any long-term commitments because of that, I totally understand that. I can get that point of view. I just don't see it with this team. I don't see it with this farm system, and I don't see any reason to take that step back when you have guys like Johnny Cueto, like Matt Latos, and like Joey Votto who are in their primes right now, and you have guys like Brandon Phillips who are rapidly declining, and their windows are closing, and Jay Bruce is entering his prime. That's another guy you want to capitalize on his window. So it's a team that I just think it was the wrong idea to, take this kind of transition year type of approach to it. But that gets us into our over-unders, unless you have anything else to say about their offseason.
No, all right. So the over-under for this team is 84.5. I guess I'll go first. I'm actually going to be taking the under because I know that there's a really good chance that this team could possibly surprise some people, but I really think that this team is just going to end up becoming a disaster. Obviously, Latos, he really hasn't been healthy. Homer Bailey is unproven. And Cueto could also get injured this year too. So, and plus also having a new manager, I think things can get really bad with this team, and also probably Brandon Phillips could be traded at the deadline. So that's also something to look out for around this team.
Yeah, I originally had the over, but after listening to myself talk for the last 10 minutes, I'm going with the under. It's just like a team, the first, I don't know, 14 guys in the roster are 14 really capable players that could produce, and produce like a playoff team, but that never does any good in the MLB. You got to have depth. You got to be a deep team with multiple options if guys go down. And it's a team that I think, like I said, is a couple injuries away from really being a disaster. And it's a team that, like you said, with a guy like Brandon Phillips, or even a guy like, I don't know, maybe a Mike Leake or something, just a name I threw out there. But it's a team that if they struggle early on in the season and they play in a pretty tough division, a very top-heavy division, if they're 8 games or 6 games or 7 games, something like that, out of the wild card race at the deadline, I don't think they're going to be hesitant to move a guy like Brandon Phillips or a guy like Chris Heisey or anyone they can find value for, because their farm system is not one of the 10 or 15 strongest in baseball, unless I'm completely misevaluating that. But I would not evaluate it as one of the top 10 or 15 farm systems in baseball. And I think when you don't have a group or a young crop of players like that, you got to look to make moves at the deadline. I think this is a team that, if they find themselves out of contention, they're not going to be afraid to move a piece or two to gain an asset. So I give them a D plus. And unless you have anything else to say, you can move on to the second place finisher last year.
All right, we're going to the last year's kind of Cinderella darling of the MLB, the Pittsburgh Pirates, who finally made it back to the postseason. I totally forget how long it was, but it wasn't like over 20 years since they've.
I think it was 1991, right?
Something like that. I don't know. I totally forgot by now, but. So, Pittsburgh Pirates last year, second in the NL Central, 94-68, a very surprising year, but a very boring offseason from them. Their biggest thing was that they lost their ace in A.J. Burnett. He signed with the Phillies for 1 year, $16 million, which is really surprising. But
it's such a ridiculous contract.
It's 1 year, and it'll be gone for this year. No big deal.
That's true.
They got a ton of money committed to Hamels, but we'll talk about it in the next episode.
Exactly.
So they lost their ace in A.J. Burnett. This rotation really seems pretty thin on this team, too. They acquired catcher Chris Stewart from the New York Yankees, and they signed Edison Volquez, who kind of reminds me of, who is there? Oh, Liriano. I don't know why he reminds me of Liriano, but they just kind of like rebuilt Liriano, and he's became so good last year. I know he's going to be their their opening day starter this year. So, I really think that they have a really good chance to end up rebuilding Edison Volquez, who when he was with the Reds, he was actually pretty solid. And then he got busted for steroids, and his career really went south. But he's trying to get back to that. I think that they can actually probably do it. I think Clint Hurdle is that good of a manager. So what do you think about this team's depth chart? I mean, it seems pretty thin.
I agree with you. It's definitely a team with some weaknesses in terms of depth. But I think what we saw last year, and I've heard this over and over again, it's not always, you don't always have to have a complete team going into a season to be able to be a complete team coming out of it, just because the MLB trade deadline is always so active. And you look at this team, it definitely has its holes. Just going to go back to their offseason. They didn't add much in terms of finding a Justin Morneau replacement, finding a right fielder, or yeah, because I guess Marte's going to play left field again. They don't really have a right field option. They could look to upgrade at shortstop. They have places where they could look to upgrade. But I can certainly see the fluke side of this team. I also see the side of I felt like this was coming over the last couple of years. They had hot starts and then fell apart at the end, and I felt like this type of season was coming. It was brewing, and I think last year everything just clicked. And I don't know if 94 wins is going to be reachable again, but I definitely think it's a team that's going to be in there for the wild card chase once again. I think when you have guys like Andrew McCutchen on your team, you have young, just absolute superstar in the making guys like Starling Marte and Garrett Cole. It's a team with a strong farm system with other pitching prospects coming up, like Jameson Taillon, exactly, and I believe the shortstop name is Alan Hansen. It's one of their top shortstop prospects. He's coming up soon. He can fill that Clint Barmas hole. If you get a guy like Neil Walker who can bounce back after he had a down year relative to the rest of his career last season. But they got good production out of Gabby Sanchez, who I did not know this, but actually ended up with a 361 OBP last year. Very high, higher than I expected. And I think it's a team with a couple holes in it, but some patchable holes. And I think it's a team with a very strong rotation. They lost Burnett. They're going to end up with Liriano. Maybe Jeff. I mean, I know Jeff Locke had a pretty disastrous second half, but Wandy Rodriguez has been pretty steady for that team ever since they acquired him at the deadline 2012. Charlie Morton, again, another steady season. Only started 20 games, but still had a 3.26 ERA in those 20 games. Go ahead. I thought you had something to say.
He ended up getting a pretty nice he ended up getting a pretty nice extension this offseason from that.
Definitely.
Right.
And yeah, and a guy like Garrett Cole's going to come up. He's probably only going to get better. You got other young guys coming up too. A strong bullpen with Jason Gurley and Mark Melanson.
Shark Tank.
Yeah, exactly. I like their pitching staff. I like the pitching staff a lot, and I think that they're going to get some improvement out of some young guys in their team. And I think that ultimately, I think this is sustainable, which I guess is where we would disagree on this team. But and the Edison Volquez thing, it's an interesting signing. He's a guy that's had a lot of success in the past and has struggled a little bit in recent years. Maybe they can dip back into that tank and try to find something like something of what it was 3 years ago. But I agree with you in the sense that maybe they should have been a little bit more involved in the Nelson Cruz sweepstakes or something like that. I mean, you look at a guy, Cruz only got signed for $8 million. I know the Pirates work with a low budget, but I think you could find a way to fit that into your payroll to get a player like that. I think you would do wonders for a lineup like this. Just add another power bat. It's not a team with a whole lot of power when you get past Andrew McCutchen and Pedro Alvarez. Other than that, they only got 16 homers out of Neil Walker and 15 out of Russell Martin, and they only had I don't know what the team total was, but their starting lineup looks like it was under 60, not probably over the 60, but under like 80 home runs or 90 home runs or something like that. It's a team without a lot of power, but and I agree. I think a Nelson Cruz would have been great for their lineup, but that does get us into their offseason grade. If you want to move forward with that, I ended up giving them a C, just because. Like I said, it's a team that works with a low budget, but I think it is a team that could have done a little bit more instead of going after secondary options like Chris Stewart and Edison Volquez. I think they could have been more involved in getting a right fielder or getting a left-handed bat for first base or something like that. But other than that, I don't have much else to say about their offseason. What about you?
Yeah, their offseason was really pretty boring. I was just really disappointed that they didn't go after Nelson Cruz. I think that having him on this team would have been nice. But however, I'm looking at their outfield stats, and it looked like pretty much everyone hit over 280. McCutchen hit I just lost it. He had 317 last year. Then you have Starling Marte 280. Then you have Jose Tabata hitting 282. So that's a pretty decent production from your outfield. So I guess maybe they didn't really have much room for Nelson Cruz, but I don't know. I just this team didn't really do much this offseason to make themselves a lot better, so I'm going to be giving them a D+.
Yeah, and they lost Garrett Jones too, which I think is not a huge loss, but it's a bigger loss than I think people will make it out to be. I believe he ended up signing with Miami. And he's a guy that did well against righties. He hit 15 homers for them last year. He had 27 in 2012. And I think that's a bigger piece than people are going to make that out to be. But I think they'll miss Garrett Jones at some point this year. But that brings us to their over/under. Their over/under this year is 83, which is a whole 11 wins lower than last year's total of 94. So a lot of people, I guess, or a lot of the Sharks are thinking it was a fluke. They're going to come back to reality this year. But I'm going to disagree with them. I'm going to go with the over on this team. Like I said, I think it's sustainable. I think that they have enough young talent. They have the right manager with Clint Hurdle. I think is a very smart manager. Led the Rockies to the World Series in 2007 and has done wonders with this Pirates team. I think they have the right guys in the clubhouse, like McCutchen, like Russell Martin, working with that pitching staff. I just think it's what they. I think what they did last year is sustainable, and I think 94 might not be a reasonable win total for them this year, but I think 88, 89 is a very reasonable expectation for a team like this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. It could be sustainable, but I mean, it just seems like the past couple years before they finally made the playoffs, it was always like at the deadline they're they're really hot, they're actively buying at the deadline, and then the second half of the season they just totally flop. So I mean, they have the talent to get there, definitely, but this team really needs to avoid some injuries. I mean, they really rely on like a core of like 3 or 4 guys plus that nice average hitting outfield. But for this over-under of 83, I'm going under on that. I don't think that this is sustainable, and I don't think they're going to get to 83 wins.
All right, and we will move on to the fifth and final team, the St. Louis Cardinals.
Favorite.
Yep, the definite favorites. They went 97-65 last year. Obviously, won the NL Central. Ended up winning the NL, losing to the Red Sox in the World Series, 4 games to 2. I almost said 6 games to 2. To recap their offseason, they had a pretty eventful offseason. They ended up losing Carlos Beltran, who ended up signing a 3-year, $45 million contract with the New York Yankees. His replacement will be Alan Craig, who will move to right field this year, and you might see Oscar Tavares there at some point as well. They also traded David Freese to the Angels for Peter Borges. Pretty simple. I mean, they're going to move Matt Carpenter over to third base, bring Colton Wong up full-time to play second, and they definitely could use some more production out of that center field spot. They used John Jay a lot last year. I think Borges can provide a good platoon with him. He's a very fast guy, very good defensively, so that could work out well. Johnny Peralta, they also gave a big 4-year, $53 million contract to. In 2013, he had a big year. He had over 300 before getting busted for PEDs, suspended for the 50 of the final 51 games or something like that. Maybe it was the final 50 games of the MLB season. Then he came on in the postseason and absolutely wreaked havoc on the pitching staffs of the Oakland A's and the Boston Red Sox. A great hitter for a shortstop, a pretty poor fielder, not great range. The sabermetric stats will disagree with that. The joke in Detroit is he gets everything that's hit to him, but he can't get anything else. He's been a little bit inconsistent over his career. Like I said, he had over 300 in 2013, but in 2012 he only had 239 with a 305 OBP and a 384 slugging percentage. So it's a guy with some inconsistency in his past, and this could turn out to be a big flop of a contract. But I mean, let's be real. When's the last time St. Louis has flopped on a contract like this? It just seems like everyone who goes to that team just performs to their full capabilities. And I don't know if it's the coaching staff there, if it's the fans, or whatever it is. It's the Cardinals' devil magic or whatever. But they also ended up losing John Axford, a piece that they picked up at the deadline last year and actually pitched pretty well for them down the stretch. And they signed Mark Ellis to a 1-year contract. I liked that move. He's, I've talked about it before, young guy insurance. If Colton Wong flops, if he doesn't work out, they got a good veteran in Mark Ellis to be right there. To give him days off, to give him full stretches off if he's really struggling or slumping. Ellis played reasonably well for the Dodgers last year. Was one of the key glue guys on their team. And I think it was a pretty good offseason. There's not much to not like about this team. Obviously, it's one of the best organizations in baseball, one of the best farm systems in baseball, and great, great MLB veterans already with guys like Yadi Peralta and Adam Wainwright. But what do you think about this team in 2014?
Well, I think the Johnny Peralta contract was probably a bit inflated, but also Johnny Peralta is still going to be a upgraded shortstop, even if he hits 250 this season. Technically, for this team, that's actually still going to be an upgrade. Is it worth $13 million a year? I doubt it, but this team just has so much depth. I mean, this is just the definition of like a perfectly run organization. They just have so much talent waiting everywhere. I mean, like you said, they got Oscar Tavares waiting. I mean, that kid's going to be a stud. They have so many different guys, and like Trevor Rosenthal, Carlos Martinez, who's had a great spring, and then just that rotation anchored by Adam Wainwright, probably like a top 5 pitcher in the NL at least, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just this rotation is so young. Michael Wacha, you have Lance Lynn, Jaime Garcia, who's actually injured, but you also have Joe Kelly, Shelby Miller. I think it's water again.
Yeah, I'll quickly talk
um,
about. I'll touch on the Peralta thing. You hit it on the head. It's not even necessarily about the contract in this case. It's about the player. Sometimes the most valuable thing can be the most expensive thing, and I think in this case, just Peralta, is going to be such a drastic upgrade over the Pete Cosma, Daniel Descalso mess that they had over there last year.
oh,
That
I know
was.
you're done talking. You filling in for me, I got you. But yeah, I mean, like just what I was talking about with this rotation, it's just so deep and it's so young, and this farm system is just ridiculously run. It's run so well, so many different prospects in it. So, obviously, you also have a top three NL MVP candidate in Yadier Molina this year. And Peter Boyd is in center field. That's going to be really interesting for this team. I mean, he could definitely be a spark plug. Obviously, great speed, probably one of the fastest people in baseball. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fits in with this lineup. I mean, you have so many hitters on this team, Matt Carpenter especially. It'll be pretty interesting this season.
Yep, and they'll get a full year of Matt Adams playing first base this year. He had 17 home runs in 296 at bats last season. That's crazy power. A typical MLB season is about 650 at bats, so equate 17 homers and 300 at bats. That they could get crazy power out of the first base spot this year. And like I said, Craig will be moving into right to replace Beltran, so I don't think they'll miss him too much. It's the type of farm system that they can lose guys like Carlos Beltran, and they won't miss him at all. They have one of the best prospects in baseball, Oscar Tavares, ready to come up probably at some point this season, I would guess. And their pitching, the depth they have is just absolutely crazy. They'll come in this year with Adam Wainwright, Lance Lynn, Shelby Miller, Joe Kelly, Michael Wacha, Jaime Garcia, who's been hurt a little bit this year, but even looking past that, they'll have Carlos Martinez down there ready to come up. It's a crazy deep farm system, and their bullpen is going to be as strong as ever. Even though they lose Edward Mujica, they still have Trevor Rosenthal, who was turned out to be a dominant for them down the stretch. They still have Seth Maness. I always can never pronounce that name. I think it's Seth Maness. And it's the type of team that'll go out and make a move at the deadline. They've made moves in the past. They've been very aggressive at trade deadlines in the past, and have made moves that have sealed championships in the past. If you look at 2011, dealing away a guy like Colby Rasmus and picking up the guys that they did, it turned out to be the right move, and it turned out to win them a championship in 2011. So, it's an aggressive front office. It's a great team. It's a great organization. There's not much to say negative about this team. And they're going to be a World Series contender every year. I like the manager, Mike Matheny. He's done well in his first 2 years there. And, it's a team that's been in the NLCS each of the last 2 years. There's not much like I said, there's just not much to say negatively about this team. But do you have any final thoughts on them, or do you want to move forward into the offseason grades?
I just want to say that obviously this bullpen is it's going to be kind of interesting to see how Jason Mott does this year with the bullpen. I really haven't heard too much about him and how he's been progressing from his injury last year. Obviously, he was shut down. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if he can provide a boost for this team this year. I mean, they really don't need any more pitchers. Obviously, they have so much depth. But it'll be interesting to see if Jason Mock can come back this year. So.
Yep, and I think I'll just say one more thing before we get into the offseason grade. I think you can look and see that their bullpen doesn't have all the big names that they've had in previous years, but I think you can also say at the same time they've made moves in the past to get bullpen pieces, and they've also had guys, some of their young prospects come up. I mean, they have 7 or 8 quality. By the end of the season, they might have 7 or 8 guys who can come up and give them starts, and you might see 2 or 3 of those guys end up moving to their bullpen, like you saw with Carlos Martinez last year, and I think that'll help out their bullpen a lot. So, but other than that, do you want to give your offseason grade for the St. Louis Cardinals?
Yeah, so for the St. Louis Cardinals, I gave them an A-. I think that getting Johnny Peralta is going to be such a big boost to this team. And then also being aggressive and getting rid of Freese and getting Peter Borges. I think they're really going to like having Borges up there at the top of the lineup, providing the speed. Or unless he hits 8th for this team. I'm not sure yet. I haven't really paid attention to the lineup. But I definitely like their offseason a lot, getting Peralta as well. And Mark Ellis providing some depth. So I'm going to give them an A-.
And I gave them a B+. You could definitely make the argument if you give them a higher grade. There's not much to complain about. They're going to filter out old guys with new guys. They gave those new guys backup plans, which is always something you need when you have a lot of new guys coming up who are expected to produce. But the only reason I downgraded it is just because I wasn't a big fan of the Peralta contract. I thought they could have looked at other options. I know they pushed hard for a Troy Tulowitzki trade. I mean, that would have been a match made in heaven for a guy
ridiculous.
like that. I know. I would have been pretty afraid if I was really anyone in baseball. But Yeah, I think I think there was other options out there, and I value defense at a position like shortstop more so than I value offense. So Peralta is the exact opposite of that. So I wasn't a big fan of the Peralta contract, but other than that, definitely a positive offseason. I liked the trading Freeze for Borges. I didn't mind losing Beltran. I liked the Mark Ellis pickup. I mean, there's not a lot. The Peralta thing was the only thing that bugged me about their offseason. I think it was enough to give them or to get their grade down to a B plus. But we'll move on to the over unders. 91.5 for the Cardinals. I did have to think about this one. A lot of people, they won 97 games last year, and I think a lot of people are going to pound the over on this one. I did have to think about this. I just went back and looked over some of their previous year's records. A lot of their time they're in that upper 80s, lower 90s win total. I think they won 88 in 2012 and 90 in 2011, and like 80 something in 2010, maybe 89. So it's a team that seems to fall there and kind of in that range more often than I originally had thought. And I think they had something like a 320 average with runners in scoring position last year. That's not going to be sustainable. That's going to come back down. But I think at the same time, you look at it in terms of talent on last year's team relative to this year's team. It's a team that I don't see taking major steps back. So maybe they won't win 97 again, but I think they'll be right in the 94, 95 range, and I'll take the over on this one easily.
I'm taking the over on this one as well, and I'm actually going to say over pretty easily. I'm saying probably around 95, 96 wins. I think one thing that you do have to note is obviously losing Carlos Beltran. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how much of a blow that does to this offense. I mean, they lost Albert Pujols, and they did perfectly fine without him. So I think there's no reason that they couldn't do just as good without Carlos Beltran. Obviously, they have Peter Borges filling in for him, but I think that this NL Central generally, without the Cardinals, has gotten a lot weaker this season. I mean, there's just a lot of ifs. I mean, obviously the Pirates, I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain 94 wins again this season. The Reds definitely could be taking a step back. The Brewers are mediocre, and the Cubs are just pretty darn awful. So
They're the Cubs.
Yeah, I definitely think this team can pretty much beat up on another weak division this year. I mean, obviously last year it was pretty tough having all three. You had the two wild cards and then the division winners. You had three playoff teams from this division last year. I doubt that's going to happen this year. I obviously think Washington and Atlanta will probably both get in this year. But, I just think division, it's definitely going to be way over 91.5, probably.
Right. You cut out a little bit there at the end.
Oh, did I?
Yeah, but you said over easily, and I think you made most of your point before it cut out. But yeah, that's pretty much going to do it. So we're done with the NL Central. If you missed it yesterday, we posted the NL West. Tomorrow we'll be covering the NL East, and then we'll move into the AL after that. But that's going to do it. There'll be timestamps in the description as always. And I hope you guys did enjoy. Ryan, do you have any final thoughts? Anything to say?
Just want to thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this. And I try to get through my tongue-biting instances and whatnot. I can't talk right now because of it. It hurts. Like it presses up on like my teeth. And it burns like crap. It's so hard to pronounce like some of these S's and stuff.
That is the worst.
Sorry. I apologize if I sound like I'm stuttering.
But yeah, that's pretty much gonna do it. So channel links will be in the description, all that good stuff, and check the description for more info as always. But that's gonna do it. So for Ryan, thank you guys for watching. Hope you did enjoy, and as always, I'm out. Peace.